morning. Welcome to ASEAN BIZ, your only choice of business updates covering ASEAN countries. I'm your host, Chia, and together with me is
Eric Chong.
And we bring you business news on everything that happens around the world, which involves ASEAN countries.
In this brand new edition, we bring you 4 segments. The current business update, our durian main story, funny business moment, and health is wealth.
Let's start with our current business update. Our focus today is on Gen Y bankruptcy in Malaysia. A very recent news article says that about 25,000 people below the age of 35 had been made bankrupt since 2010. Now, to be bankrupt, you need to owe at least 30,000 ringgit Malaysia. Eric, I believe bankruptcy is not only a problem limited to Malaysia. I believe all the other ASEAN countries have this problem to some extent. Some countries may be even more serious than Malaysia.
And in accordance with some statistics shows around the world, okay, the Gen Y, especially, okay, that's talking about the Gen Y, which is age below 35. A high percentage of them are under bankruptcy before they reach 35.
Wow.
Okay, so
that's bad.
This is very bad indications because we will be so-called living with a group of bankruptcies before they reach 35.
Now, Eric, why are these people getting bankrupt so early? What are the causes?
Oh, mainly I would say that they live with beyond their means. Like there's been servicing car loans,
Right.
okay, and housing loans,
Yeah.
personal loans,
Credit
cards, and becoming a guarantor for other people,
for their friends or
for their friends
relatives,
or relatives.
or business partners.
Yes, and being young, they are not exposed to a lot of elements. It's unlike our years, we are exposed to a lot of survival elements, right? So,
Right.
and these particular generations, they are not subject to a lot of survival elements, so which makes them less street-wise.
Is it true to say that the main cause of this problem is that they are living beyond their means? These young people, I mean.
Well, I would say that most of them are living beyond their means.
Yeah, I think
And
there's a statistic here, Eric. It says about 37%
Yes,
of young Malaysians are found to be living beyond their means.
yes, and I would say partly it's also because of temptations.
Right.
With so many products in the market, they can't resist the temptations, consumerisms, and keeping up with the peers.
Right. Peer pressure.
Peer pressures, which makes them buying things beyond their means by using credit cards.
Yeah, the other problem I noticed, Eric, is that some young people, they are not so realistic, probably because they are young, right? For
Yes.
example, we have, say, people who work in a sales line.
Yeah.
For 1 month, they might make a sudden windfall of, say, $10,000, whereas their normal commission could be around $2,000 or $3,000. So 1 month, they make 10,000. Then they tell themselves, I can make $10,000 a month.
A month.
The problem is they don't realize that it's a month
Yes.
and only 1 month.
So which means that they are very optimistic about it.
Yes, they think that the next
They
month
can
they
make-
could be making even more than that,
They thought that they can make 10,000 every month,
or even more.
even more.
So they quickly rush out to buy a new car.
buy a new car, and anything local is a disappointment.
Oh, that's bad. Yeah. So they must get the state-of-the-art German or Japanese car, right?
Cars, right?
So come the next month, very quickly, they found that instead of making 10,000, they are making their normal 3,000, or probably when there's some economic problem, like they implement the GST, immediately the sales will drop, right?
yes,
And they could be making less than their normal 3,000.
right. And
So immediately they run into problems, they cannot
and
service
with
their
escalating living expenses, which makes them much more in a detrimental position to service the car loan, and they rush out to buy a house
car.
to get married.
Right.
Okay.
So suddenly they found that they are too optimistic.
Yeah, and nowadays buying house is not cheap also
Right.
in KL.
Mm.
Not only in KL, in fact in other parts of the country, slightly outskirts, other states, the property pricing is also not cheap.
Yeah, getting costly to own a house.
Getting costly
And
to
that's
own
the reason why they must quickly own a house before it becomes more unaffordable.
more unaffordable. Which
So you see the logic there.
drive them to quickly buy a house,
Yeah.
no matter what.
Don't worry, I'll be able to service it later.
Okay.
Right now, I'm earning 3,000, right? I'll be earning more than that a year from now, or maybe 6 months from now.
So the weather will always be better.
Yeah.
That's
So
the speculations.
suddenly, what they expected didn't really come true. And in some cases, they might even get retrenched or transferred, and there'll be some loss of income, and immediately they run into some problems.
Yeah, Andrews. So much have been said. We don't. So how to prevent all these things to happen?
Yeah, I think basically number one is don't take on too much debt. What do you mean by too much, Eric?
Well, I've been.
If let's say you're earning say $3,000, how much debt should you have?
Let's work
5,000.
Let's work on what's the institution calculations.
Right.
Okay, they were based on your income. 60% of your income should be servicing the debts.
Are you sure? No.
That is their calculations. Okay.
Left only 48.
So you're left with 40% of
for
living expenses. Yes. So
food and petrol.
Food, petrol, EPF, everything.
And insurance.
And insurance. So probably the net pay of a particular person probably is about 20%.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's
there's nothing much left for savings. So that comes to a lot of educations and a lot of discipline.
Right.
On
I think
handling
the
them.
bank would like you to spend only 30% of your income to pay the installments. And then the car loan also maybe 20 or 30%.
Yes. So everything adds up, probably you will reach about 60 to 70% of your income to service your debts. And not including your credit cards.
Yeah.
Personal
then you'll
loans.
be on a very tight budget,
Then
isn't
you're
it?
living on a very tight budget.
So number two, how to prevent? Don't live beyond your means.
Yes. And what you mean by that? Don't live beyond your means.
The saying goes, don't wear a hat that is too big for your head.
But I need to act positive. What? If I don't act positive, how can I look good in front of my friend?
Exactly. That brings us to point number three, how to prevent.
Yes. So when you look at this, how do you expand your means?
Yeah, a lot of people talk only about one part of the equation, not living beyond your means. For example, you earn $3,000. You are advised to spend less than $3,000.
Yeah, probably the best you spend.
The other part of the equation, people don't tell you that you don't always have to earn only $3,000. You can expand it to $5,000 or $10,000, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
So that is the part that most people don't talk about, and a lot of young people, they are not aware. So everybody, their parents tell them don't live beyond your means, so they stinge and try to cut down on everything. By right, they can actually increase their means. That is part of financial intelligence,
and by expanding your means, which means they have to work extra hard.
Probably extra smart,
and look into more avenues of income.
Right.
But looking into more avenues of income, which means have to spend more time working, or
right.
So I will have less time.
Sacrifice.
I will have less time with my friends, or go drinking.
Yeah, you
clubbing.
See some people nowadays, they get married very late. Probably that's the reason.
Well, what's the reason?
They have to spend time making more money, isn't it?
More money and spend time with friends.
Yeah. So they have less time for dating and getting married.
So when you look at these so-called preventive measures, who are responsible to give all this
according to this news article, the FOMCA is responsible, or rather the FOMCA took upon this responsibility by themselves. What is a FOMCA?
Well, FOMCA is the Federations of Malaysia Consumer Associations.
I believe you have such associations in other countries, in ASEAN also.
I would say most of the world will have these associations.
Right.
And I was puzzled. How come it becomes FOMCA's responsibilities?
Because it seems that FOMCA discovered this problem of young people getting bankrupt and even older people getting bankrupt. So they took it upon themselves, the responsibility to help prevent or improve the situation. And they are right now drafting a financial education policy with the hope that the government will implement it at all levels.
Well, isn't that already in the pipeline of the education policies?
Right. Talking about education, I mean this is my personal opinion, that anything to prevent things that are bad from happening, it should fall on the education ministry, right?
Yes, everything starts with educations.
Right,
And as
exactly.
the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
Exactly, perfectly agreed.
Yes. So, if the government does not take on the responsibility to implement the financial education policies,
Right.
okay, so on what yardstick can they judge the drafting of the
Eric,
Formcast?
I believe our Malaysian government have already started teaching about financial intelligence in primary school for young children so that they can manage their finances better.
And I would say that's a very good initiative.
Yes, fantastic.
Yes, and I would say that this financial education should extend to parents as well.
Yeah.
Okay, because nowadays we see modern parenting is quite different, and most of the modern parents are showering their kids with material things,
Right.
which makes them very materialistic and turns them into consumerism.
So besides Formca, Eric, is there other agencies or institutions that are helping to prevent
Well, here
bankruptcies?
here they mentioned at the news that this agency is called AKPK, which is the Agency Counseling and Pengurusan Credit, was set up by Bank Negara.
In English, it means Counseling and Credit Management Agency.
Yes. So they are looking at debt management and financial education to help individuals take control of their financial situation.
Right.
Okay. So in this case, it's a damage rectifying.
Yes. It's a good initiative,
Gesture.
but it's not a preventive
It's not
measure.
preventive measures.
It's
okay?
more of you have already taken so much debt.
Yes.
Now let us help you to manage.
Yes.
Firstly, let us help you to negotiate with the banks to take off all the overdue charges and extra interest
Yes.
and come up with the smallest amount that is
Yes.
acceptable to them.
And damage already done.
Right. And then they will help you to structure so that you can pay it in some of installments that is least burdensome to you.
So I'm curious if they help you to restructure your so-called debts condition. Do they help you to expand your means?
I believe this is not under their control. That should be under the education
Right.
ministry to help
Because
people
if
improve.
they are struggling with meeting the means, okay, how you structure their debts is also become another issue.
Eric, financial intelligence is a big subject with many topics. So this is one small topic which they are helping their clients to control their debt, or rather damage control.
Okay, damage control. So where you get the source of money, that's not my department.
Yes. Damage prevention is another department.
Another department. So you have to look for
Lot of
another
work.
department. It's another heavy burden by itself. Okay.
So Eric, coming to the most important part, how does this affect you as a young person living in ASEAN countries, and what are the implications if there's a bankruptcy either already affecting you or hovering your head and you have too much debt unable to pay?
First thing first, as a bankrupt, you cannot own properties or cars.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
cannot open a bank account.
Right.
You cannot register a business or become a director of a company. Okay, and you cannot hold important positions in organizations.
Even in charity
Even
organizations.
in charity organizations. Okay, and it's very difficult for you to get a job, and you can't travel overseas unless with a special approval from
The
the
insolvency
Tempatan,
department.
insolvency, and you
Finally-
will feel some embarrassment between your friends.
Yeah. In fact, some people even commit suicide
Yes.
when they are
So I would
either bankrupt or almost.
Say it turns down into more of a ego issues. Okay, and they felt that being bankrupt is something very shameful.
Right. Okay, listeners, if you are in some kind of financial trouble, you must understand this. Bankruptcy is not the end of the world.
Yes, it could be the start of a new life.
Right. A lot of people who are very rich and famous today were once bankrupt.
Yeah, quite a few of them have been bankrupt a few times.
It is just a minor setback on your road to success.
And for you to look back what have not been done correctly.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
It's time to make some assessment and adjustments
Yes.
and to continue to become a success.
And with these notes, we take a short break from here.
Great.
Great. And we continue later. Thank you.
We'll be back. Welcome back, guys. You're listening to ASEAN BIZ, your only choice for business updates covering ASEAN countries. Right now, we are going into the segment called Funny Business Moments.
Okay.
Over to you, Eric, to share with us our joke today.
Okay, Andrew, just now we've been mentioning about expanding the means, doing business. So being in business sometimes have their own problems. You know? So on this particular day, this guy walked into the boss office. And he walked straight to the boss and asked the boss, "Sir, I've been straight with you. I know the economic isn't great, but I have over 3 companies after me, and I would like to respectfully ask for a raise."
You mean this guy is an employee?
He's an employee. He walked into the boss office. So after a few minutes of haggling, the boss finally agrees to a 5% raise. And this guy walked out of the room happily and leave. Then the boss was very curious and he said, "Hey, by the way, which 3 companies are after you?" Then this guy looked back and said, "Well, first is the electric company, the water company, and the phone company." So, bosses, don't fall into this trap when your employees walk into your room and say 3 companies are going after him. Okay, it could be these 3 companies.
Yeah, it's true. They are going after him. What?
Yeah, it's true, in a true sense. And employees, please bear in mind you can use this method.
In all honesty, he's not lying.
He's not lying. It's just that
these guys are really hot on his heels.
And the boss just didn't catch it. That's all. Right. Okay, so we continue with our main story today, the Greece bailout, part 2.
The Great Greece Bailout, part 2.
Yes.
This story is brought to you by Sanfis, the Center for Financial Intelligence Studies, and edited by Andrew Chia, that's myself, who is the chief writer at Sanfis. I'm sure by now most of us are aware that there is a financial crisis going on in Europe, particularly in the country of Greece. You may have heard the latest news that Greece is going to default on its loans quite soon. And the chairman of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, is angry with Greece for not accepting their terms for helping Greece pay its loans. We are going to cover more than that in our story on Greece called the Great Greece Bailout, Part 1 and Part 2. You will actually find out what happened, how much money they owe, why it happened, why does Greece have to borrow so much money, how it happened, how come Greece is able to borrow so much money, and who are the players who will determine whether Greece will or will not default. What will happen if they default or are unable to pay their loans? Not only what will happen to them, but also what will happen to us in ASEAN as well as other countries in various parts of the world. All this you will find in our story on Greece titled The Great Greece Bailout. Today we are bringing you part 2 of the story. If you missed part 1 of the story, you may retrieve that story from our archives.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so we continue with the Great Greece Bailout part 2.
Yes.
So Andrew, why do we want to measure debts against GDP?
Right. Now part 1 we are talking about Greece having a lot of debts. And that debt is more than 100% of their GDP. Right now it's almost reaching 180%. It's a really unbelievable amount of debt that Greece is owing. Something like $360 billion. And we measure that against the debt. Against the GDP.
Right.
Why do we do that? Now that needs to be measured against something in order to make a comparison that is useful. For example, the debt of a business is usually measured against its assets or revenue. Similarly, the debt of a country is usually measured against its GDP. We have a chart here that shows the debt to GDP ratio of all the countries in the world. From this chart, it appears that countries like North America, Europe and Japan have the highest debt ratios in the world, whereas those with the lowest include Russia, Eastern Europe and North Africa. You may be interested to know about the debt ratios of the biggest 4 economies in the world today. That is, number 1 largest is the US. Right now they are having a GDP debt of $17 trillion debt.
Wow, that's a very high
measured
amount.
Against their GDP, it is 105%.
So still not too bad, isn't it?
There are many countries higher than that.
Yes.
Does that give you any confidence?
So, let's short while. Just now, Andrew, you were mentioning to view our charts. Okay.
Right.
So how can our listeners view this chart?
That's a good question. This chart is actually extracted from a Senfis book, or rather e-book, which you can get either from my website, andrewchia.com, or from Senfis website.
Okay, right. Let's continue.
Right. Great. The number 2 biggest economy in the world, that is China, has a debt of 10 trillion.
Against their GDP?
Yes.
With a ratio of 22%.
22%, right. Sorry, that's not the debt, that's their GDP.
Their GDP.
Of 10 trillion. They only have 22%, around 2 or 2.2 trillion of debts.
That's very healthy?
Right.
Yes, okay.
And Japan is the 3rd largest economy in the world with a GDP of 4 trillion. And they have a debt to GDP ratio of a very high percentage of 243%.
Wow.
It's more than twice their GDP.
So in a simple business words, it's like very high gearing.
Yes. Their GDP is 4 trillion. Their debt is probably 8 trillion or 9 trillion. And 4th largest economy in the world, that is Germany, its GDP is roughly the size of Japan, almost 4 trillion also. And they have a debt to GDP ratio of 77%.
Which works up to about what? Like about 3 trillion?
Something like that.
Yes.
Slightly more.
Okay. So which means they got no problem servicing the loans.
Talking about debt to GDP ratio, now this may not have anything to do with our topic at hand, but a lot of people may be curious to know why Japan has the highest debt ratio in the world at 243%. And the main difference between US debt and Japanese debt, why we compare with US is because they are the biggest economy in the world. Okay?
Yeah.
Now the difference is this: 70% of US debt is owed to US citizens, banks and corporations, and the Federal Reserve, with the remaining 30% owing to foreign countries, mainly China and Japan. Hey, Japan already owes so much money but still can afford to lend to the US. It's a strange world that we live in, right?
Yes.
Furthermore, Japan is the largest creditor nation in the world.
Wow, Japan got so much money to loan out, and yet they owe so much money.
So there's a little bit of difference. US debt, 70% is owed to citizens. Japanese debt is 95% owed to its citizens, and only 5% owed to foreign countries.
Well, is that smart management?
You see, the Japanese being very much more patriotic. They're not inclined to demand repayment from their government. So it's a more stable situation, isn't it?
So only when the bonds are matured, then only they will cash it out.
In case the government cannot pay, they can ask for an extension of time, right?
Extension of time to stay in Japan longer. Or to live longer.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere, right?
Right, you are still a Japanese. Okay. So what is the level of debt which is considered safe? And who says so?
Right, that's a good question, Eric. Just now we are talking about debts with 105%, 200%. So what percentage would be considered ideal or safe? Now the World Bank and the IMF says that if a country is able to meet its debt servicing obligations without rescheduling or accumulating arrears, its debt is considered sustainable. And the level of debt which is considered sustainable for the above definition would be at 60% or below for debt to GDP ratio. 60%, Eric. That answers your question.
Okay, right.
And this 60% criteria has been imposed on European countries wanting to adopt the euro as their currency. Therefore, this 60% ratio is adopted as a benchmark of compliance for economies around the world, including our country, Malaysia. And I believe all the countries in ASEAN would agree with this ratio also.
Yes. That's why the same as I mentioned, on the personal loan, how much does
the gearing,
bank,
things like that. Right, okay. Yeah.
Right. So
however, having said that, Eric, it is interesting to note that Germany, which is perceived as the strongest EU nation, has a debt to GDP ratio, as we mentioned just now earlier. It is at 77%. Now this exceeds that benchmark of 60%.
So does that makes them unhealthy?
Okay, let's say, well, Eric, let's just say this. All the other countries are having more debt than them.
So
Does that give you any confidence?
comparatively, they are much healthier than the rest.
Definitely.
Definitely, but not to China.
Yeah.
China is only 22%.
That's why a lot of countries are cursing China. Why are they spending so little and owing so little?
I think they spend a lot within their country, domestic spending.
I mean, if you don't overspend yourself,
Yeah.
it's very unhealthy. How they say money makes the world go round. You're not making the money going round the world.
Yeah.
Mr. China, can you please rectify that?
Okay, sure. That's why you see an influx of China tourists that's spending money like nobody business. And you can see them queuing up for branded products
Right,
overseas.
yeah.
So, coming back to here, comparatively, how much is Malaysia debt and what is the percentage of GDP?
That's a great question. Being Malaysian, we would be interested to know what is our ratio, right?
Yeah.
Based on the latest official figures, Malaysia's debt to GDP ratio stands at 55% only.
Wow, so low, which means we are qualified to become a very good borrower.
Okay, we are below 60%.
So we are a very healthy country.
We are better than Germany. Does that give you any confidence?
Yeah, so, okay, we are still very happy with it. So, as mentioned earlier, Greece has a very high level of debt compared against its GDP. Just how high is that?
Great question. We are talking about how high Greece debt. Greece's debt to GDP ratio is currently around 180% only.
Only, okay.
Okay. Also, the average ratio for Eurozone itself is around 100%. Do you understand what that means, Eric?
Well,
The average ratio, that means all the countries added up in the Eurozone. The average is how much?
Okay.
100%.
100%.
That means there are countries having more than 100%.
100%.
Some countries are less than 100%. The average is 100%.
So which means those are well-to-do one feeding them.
Probably the richer countries are having
richer country
below 100%.
below 100%, and they help them to average out.
Yes.
Okay. So what other countries have higher level than that, and what happens to them?
As mentioned earlier, Japan has the highest level of debt ratio at more than 240%. But some say the Japanese economy is doing just fine right now. Although there are many who argue that the Japanese economy is in a bad shape. Zero interest trap and very low growth and things like that. But a lot of people will tell you Japan is doing okay.
Doing okay domestically.
Mhm.
Okay. So what is the impact of Greece on the euro or the eurozone? By the way, what is the eurozone and what about the European Union, the EU?
Great. EU and Eurozone. What's the relation?
What are the relations?
Now, the European Union or the EU is a union of 28 member states currently in 2015. Located in Europe, it is an economic and political confederation of nations that share the same ideals. The EU was founded as a trade agreement formed by 6 countries in 1958. Since then, the union has grown in both power and size. Eric, before we go for a short break, shall we just run through which are the countries under the EU?
And I believe that quite a number of our listeners will be curious to find out, because some of the countries which most of them have not heard of.
Right, yeah.
And might not have the impression that it's under the EU.
And not all the EU countries are using the euro as a currency.
Yes.
We'll bring to you what type of currencies they are using. I'll start with the first 5, Eric.
Yeah.
Austria is using the euro, Belgium is using euro, but Bulgaria is using their lev.
Okay.
Croatia's currency is called the kuna. And Cyprus, a small country like Cyprus, which most people do not know that it is a EU country.
EU country, yes.
And yes, they are using the euro currency.
And the Czech Republic are using the koruna. Okay. The Denmark krone, Estonia euro, Finland euro, France euro.
Of course, Germany is using the euro and Greece is using euro. But the country of Hungary is using their currency called the forint.
Okay.
Ireland is using euro, and Italy is using euro.
Then we have Latvia, euro, Lithuania, euro, and Luxembourg, euro, Malta also euro, Netherlands also euro. A lot of people will felt that Malta is not under the eurozone also.
Right, it's a EU country.
It's a EU country, in fact.
Please respect.
Okay, right.
Poland is using USD, Portugal is using euro. Romania's currency is called the leu, L-E-U.
Okay.
Slovakia is using euro. Slovenia is also using the euro. And finally,
Spain also using the euro, whereas Sweden using the krona, and UK a sterling pound by itself.
great, fantastic.
Okay.
Shall we go for a short break now?
Yeah.
Stay tuned, guys. Don't go away.
Okay.
Welcome back, guys. You're listening to ASEAN BIZ, your only choice for business updates covering ASEAN countries. I'm your host, Andrew Chia, and together with me is
Eric Chong.
And we bring you business news on everything that happens around the world which involves ASEAN countries. Right now, we are in our durian main story, and we are covering the country of Greece. Before the break, we were mentioning about EU countries, Eric, and as we have just mentioned, out of the 28 countries in the EU, 19 countries are using the euro as their currency. And these countries are called the Eurozone. Now, 19 countries are under Eurozone, which means the remaining 9 countries are still using their own currency. The Eurozone is a monetary union created in 2002. Besides these 19 countries in the EU which use the euro, there are a few countries which are not part of the EU, but they use the euro also. They are
Andorra, Kosovo, Monaco, Montenegro, San Marino, and Vatican City.
great.
Okay.
To repeat, the EU has 28 member countries currently, and the Eurozone has 19 member countries. Eurozone countries must be member states of the EU. Now, more than 320 million Europeans use the euro, and this makes the currency so popular, and by having a common currency across these European countries, it makes cross-border transactions more convenient.
So, what is going to happen if Greece is unable to repay its debts? And what will happen to Greece then?
Greece has failed to live up to the entry criteria of 60% debt to GDP ratio, as mentioned earlier, and if Greece defaults or is unable to repay its loans, or rather refuse to pay its loans, then it will not be allowed to remain in the Eurozone. To be fair, there are many other countries in EU which exceeds the 60% debt to GDP
so
ratio.
It's not only, okay, Greece, you are not alone.
Yeah, that's what the Greece Prime Minister and Finance Minister is trying to tell the World Bank and the IMF, isn't it?
Yes, don't harp on me.
Yeah, why you pick on us?
Don't pick on us.
There are so many other countries that are also not able to pay their debts and having very high ratios. Before we move on to the other countries, let's just pick some examples. For example, Italy is owing close to 4 trillion, 3 trillion US dollars. And Spain is roughly also 2 to 3 trillion US dollars.
Those are not in good shape also.
A very, very bad shape.
Yes.
Also more than 100% of their GDP ratio. And Greece is only owing 300 over billion.
Yes.
What is that compared to
Trillion.
10 times or 15 times more than Greece?
Well, it's just too bad. Because they claims to be the father of civilizations in the Euro country.
Very unfair, right?
Right. So being a father, they need to set good example.
Right. Come back to Greece. Since we cannot avoid the issue, what will happen if Greece exits the Eurozone? Now it's exotically known as Grexit. Firstly, the standard of living could fall by more than 80%. Wow,
that's a lot.
And if you talk about what is living standard, it means people are having big houses, big cars, a good job.
Yes. Living beyond their means.
Yeah, part of the package, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Fine dining, fancy restaurants, having flat screens, TVs, SUVs.
Flat screen TVs is a necessity nowadays. Big flat.
LED flat screen TVs.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, right. Let's be specific.
So there goes all these perks and all this fine dining and having tourism every day and all that enjoyment to the max. So the standard of living could fall by 80%. Instead of going to the restaurant 8 times, 10 times, you are going now for
8 times or
2 times only.
2 times lesser.
Can you live with that?
I can live with 2
I
times
believe
lesser.
people in ASEAN can live with that, but Greece, having been used to that lifestyle, if you say out of 10 times you can now only go 2 times, I'm sure they'll run amok.
Yes, and they will start pulling their hairs and don't know what to do already.
Right. So former Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras warned that this would happen within a few weeks of Greece exiting the Eurozone. That is the first impact on Greece. Secondly, there will be no more money, simple as that. Greece would be unable to borrow from anyone, not even other European governments, and the Greek government will simply run out of euros.
Then they start to print their own currencies, though?
Yes, it will take a bit of time, and the currency will be depreciated and very low against the euro and other countries.
Then probably
currencies.
they need a wheelbarrow to move around with their currency.
Reminds us of the Japanese currency at one time, right?
Yes. Okay.
And the other problem will be the people in Greece, the citizens, will be paid in IOUs. There are a lot of people working for the government, right?
Yes.
Probably schools and hospitals and public amenities, and the government would have no money to pay them or to pay the social benefits and civil servants' wages. If they pay them at all, it will be in the form of IOUs, no more cash.
It's just like so-called food stamps.
Until a non-euro currency can be introduced back to the country.
Back to the country.
And of course, the next thing that can happen is that sovereign debt default. The government would not be able to repay its debts, which now amount to a total of more than 320 billion euros, most of it owed to European governments and agencies and the IMF.
Yeah, and coming back to this so-called unable to repay, that's the recent news this morning. Greece have come up with some proposals, and now the IMF is working on it. Give them a few more days, they will come up with an answer. Okay? So the people are holding in suspense.
Yeah, one day the government says that we won't pay.
Yes.
They are what they call brinksmanship. See what you can do to me. I won't pay the loan.
Yes, it's more like blackmailing.
Yeah, so they are blackmailing each other. The IMF says, you try doing that and see what happens.
Yes, and
Okay.
this particular news actually caused a very volatile euro these 2 days.
Yeah.
And it can swing up and down within minutes or within hours.
It's really very moody.
Very moody.
One day they feel very sad and angry and worried that
And
Greece is not paying.
Last night the euro was very strong, and this morning the euro was very weak.
Yeah,
Okay.
If anything happens to Greece, not only Greece will suffer, the whole euro and eurozone and the euro currency will suffer. The whole world will start losing confidence in the euro, right?
Yes. Then it start to break apart.
Okay, back to Greece. What else will happen if Greece fails? The next thing that can happen is a freeze on withdrawals. The government would have to impose a freeze on withdrawals and on people taking money out of the country. This means capital controls. And this could lead to long queues of ordinary Greeks trying to empty their bank accounts before they get converted into a new currency worth substantially less than the previous one.
Yes, and with the latest news yesterday, they've been seeing a lot of Greece are actually withdrawing money since yesterday. And just by calculation yesterday to date, one day itself they withdraw close to 2 billion cash from the banks. So
Wow.
in actual fact, the banks are running short of cash.
Yeah, you see people are getting so worried. And of course, the last thing is that there will be inflation. There's a real possibility of a surge in inflation. And Eric, we forgot to mention, the other big problem is unemployment.
Yes.
Right now, the unemployment situation in Greece is about 25%.
So isn't that should stand very well to live a
no need to work anymore.
No need to work, live a very easy life.
Yeah,
and
and
back
Eric,
to basic.
if you think that an unemployment rate of 25% is very high, just consider this. This is the average unemployment rate.
Yes.
For people below 35, that is our Gen Y that we mentioned earlier, the unemployment rate is as high as 50%.
50%, because they feel that they don't need to work, ma.
They can't find a job anyway.
Okay. Or they can't find a suitable job.
The economy is in tatters, no job for you. Sorry. Please go home and ask your daddy to give you money.
Or you can start becoming a farmer. Plant your own things to eat. Okay. So, we've been talking about Greece defaulting. So, has any country in the world failed or defaulted before? And what happens to them then?
Right. What they say is there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
You are not the first country to default, and you will not be the last. In 2001 and 2002, the country of Argentina was unable to pay its creditors. At that time, it was a country that has already defaulted 7 times in the past.
Wow.
Does that give you any confidence?
Which means to say that are they bankrupt, or they're bankrupt 7 times?
You can say that.
Okay.
They are unable to pay their creditors. And of course, the creditors then sued. And the US Supreme Court ordered the Argentine government to pay up. One of the creditors tried to impound the government's national assets, which include a warship and the presidential plane.
Okay.
So you see, these are the things that can happen to a country which defaults.
Then they will use their cities to contra off.
And let's take a look at what happened to Argentina at that time. When Argentina defaulted on their sovereign debt, the GDP declined from 300 billion in 2002 to 100 billion in 2003. Now, how many percent drop of GDP?
Wow, that is almost like a 200% drop of GDP. Okay.
But the strange thing is, however, the GDP has since grown at a very fast pace, rising from 100 billion in 2003 to 600 billion, a powerful recovery in 2014, that is last year. They had a GDP of 600 billion.
Okay, so within a short span of 10 to 11 years, they managed to
grow their GDP by few 100%.
6
Yes, 600%.
Yeah. So do you call that intelligent governance?
Yes.
Or intelligent spending?
However, Eric, despite that, it did not solve their economic problems. Having a high GDP did not solve their problem. Because despite the high growth in GDP, its national debt problems continued to haunt the nation all these years. And it finally defaulted again.
Okay.
Last year. Okay. And the Argentine currency, the peso, also declined seriously. The peso was at parity, that is 1-to-1, with the USD in 2001, the year they defaulted. And it slowly went down steadily to 8.8 to the dollar today.
Okay. Does that scenario looks very similar in a way?
Strange world, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, the inflation rate also soared.
Okay. So
that will give you some kind of a preview of what can happen to Greece.
And with this default of payment, then what will happen to the rest of the world? And how does that will affect our ASEAN countries?
The more important question, right?
Yes, yeah.
Greece's problem is not limited to that country itself. The Greece failure may be the beginning of the end of the Eurozone. The Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Tsipras, says this. I think it's obvious. It would be the beginning of the end of the Eurozone. If the European political leadership cannot handle a problem like that of Greece, which accounts for only 2% of its economy, what would be the reaction of the markets to countries facing much larger problems such as Spain or Italy, which has more than 2 trillion of public debt?
So indirectly he's saying that why don't you go after them?
But that's besides the point. You are owing me money.
Okay, right.
I will go after them
later.
Now, whether it's going to be the end of the Eurozone is yet to be seen. Whether they actually perform the Grexit, we still do not know at this particular point of time. Probably we'll know in a week's time. The deadline is 30th June.
Okay, so by end of the month.
Right, or rather in a few days' time. But one thing for sure is that it will affect the strength of the euro.
Definitely.
As well as the economy of the Eurozone and EU as a whole. It will affect not only ASEAN countries, which do a lot of trade with the EU, but the world economy as a whole. companies in ASEAN which are exporting goods to EU would need to pay close attention to the events unfolding there and plan their business strategies accordingly. For example, they would need to diversify their exports to other parts of the world instead of relying only on the EU market.
Okay. So do they still quote their price in euro?
Yes, right now they still quote in euro, and probably even after problems with Greece, they will still be using the EU euro.
I would say that when you are doing trades with the Europe, definitely they will quote it in euro.
Yeah,
they wouldn't want to be quoted with US dollars.
That's their main competitor.
Yeah. Okay.
And for people importing goods from the EU using the euro, you may look forward to some gains from currency exchange if the EU starts devaluing and goods become cheaper. That means good news for importers, and bad news for exporters.
So they are not getting more money, probably they are getting less money.
Great. That concludes our story on the Great Greece Bailout, which is brought to you by CENFIS, the Center for Financial Intelligence Studies, and edited by Andrew Chia. Let's go for a short break before we come back for our final segment, Health is Wealth. Don't go away, guys. Welcome back, guys. You're listening to ASEAN BIZ, your only choice for business updates covering ASEAN countries. We are back to our final segment of the day. That's Health is Wealth. And Eric Chong is going to bring you our story on Health is Wealth.
Yeah, Eric here. Okay.
Right. What's the story, Eric?
Well, we've been talking about businesses, Greece bailing out, and so-called running your own business.
Yeah, a lot of stress, right?
A lot of stress. And how does this stress comes about? Especially, let's look at the smaller businessmen like entrepreneurs.
Right.
Okay. So, what I'm going to so-called share with our listeners is that being a self-employed or being your own boss, okay, you face with a lot of factors that will actually stress you out. Okay, let's look at the things like being your own boss. You are working on something you feel passionate about, being able to set your own hours, have some control over who you work with. There are many reasons people choose to have their own business, which makes
right, Eric. Before we continue, what's the story, the title of our story today that you want to share with us?
Okay, so what I'm going to share with you all is understanding and preventing mental illness, especially for the entrepreneurs.
Aha, yes.
Okay, so there are some stress factors that cause a lot of stress. There are some
and how to deal with it.
And how to deal with it. Yet, the reality many small business owners face is far less appealing. Their financial stress, professional isolations, long hours, and blurred boundaries between the home and family life.
Yeah.
A lot of entrepreneurs will spend 18 hours in their business, 4 hours of sleep, and
lack of sleep,
and
high levels of stress.
High level of sleep.
This gives rise to some mental problems. Mental fatigue.
Okay, and those include, the first thing is the financial stress due to unpredictable income, which a lot of small businesses face.
Right.
Okay. High levels of uncertainties, where you don't know where the next job is coming from.
Whether Greece is going to pay the debts or not.
Okay. Okay. And high job demands and multiple responsibility in the workplace. Okay. Isolations and lack of social support, which means to say that when you are alone, you solve your own problem, you deal with your own things, and there's no support from your own group.
Okay. Sounds very lonely, right?
Sounds very lonely. Okay, being entrepreneurs. Okay, so entrepreneurs out there. And you have a high level of responsibility to others, including employees and your family. Okay? And presentisms, where you continue to work even if you are not well, because if you are away, the business doesn't happen. This happens to a lot of so-called businessmen. They work like a zombie. They work 18 hours, 20 hours. It happens to me before.
Yeah, time to set some systems whereby you can go on a holiday and your staff can do your work
have long
for you.
Hours, which may be even a bigger problem than in the corporate world. Okay? Right. In the corporate world, you can work 9 to 5 and nobody can stop you, and nobody can bother about you. Right? Then you can find that your work and the home does not match. The boundaries are just there. So with all these factors, and some business failures will actually cause suicidal risk.
Right. So all this add up to
A depression for small business owners, and especially they are unable to work and lost their source of income. So this happens when they fall sick, they are unable to work, and they found that they have no income. So with all these stress factors, are you going to become an entrepreneur? Well, I mean, if you are passionate about your work, there are always ways to de-stress. Okay, it's important for business owners to look after themselves. Okay, here are a few tips for stress management. Okay, first you have to make time for some enjoyable activities. Okay, look after yourself, getting enough physical activities, sleep, and eating a healthy diet. Learning some relaxation techniques such as breathing exercises.
breathing exercises.
Right. Okay. Building friendships and work relationships. Looking for creative or practical solutions to problems. So, which means to say that you got to share your problems, and you find a more different ways of solving your problems.
Right. Get some support.
Trying to accept the things that you can't change or control, so you can focus on changing the things you can control. Okay? Which happens to a lot of entrepreneurs who felt that they can do everything by themselves and they can in control of all the things. And changing the way you think about things causing you stress out can change the way you feel about it. Okay. So the first thing is to be happy and have a good behavior therapy. Okay,
help
so
you to de-stress.
Help you to de-stress. Okay. And how to have a work-life balance. Okay. Take regular breaks. Set an alarm is one way you can use to remind you to have a break. Okay. Always take a lunch break. Don't keep on working.
Yeah, this is very common. A lot of people work and then they forget the time.
They forget about eating. So they just work without lunch. And always schedule a holiday break.
Yeah, they forget about holidays also.
We have heard of friends who working for 3-5 years have not taken a holiday at all, and they feel that they are hero. So actually it's not. If you didn't take any holiday, it doesn't mean that you are heroes. And most of all, you learn how to outsource your tasks. Okay, you don't have to do everything yourself. Okay, being alone doesn't mean that you need to do everything yourself, and you are not Superman where you can do everything by yourself. Then most of all, the most important one is that have a set time where you can turn off your phone and email. Okay, let's practice that.
Right.
Okay, so with this note, I hope that every entrepreneur will look after themselves, and we talk to you later in the next program.
Yes. Thank you very much, listeners. That's all for now on our ASEAN BIZ. We'll see you again on the next edition. Bye, guys.
Bye.